So on this channel, we've talked at great lengths about both Daniel Larson and World of T-Shirts, and oftentimes these two characters are contrasted directly with each other. They both live somewhat similar lifestyles, and it can be said that the never-ending downward spirals that they both find themselves on can be quite interesting to observe as an outsider. However, there is an additional character that is also often directly associated with both Daniel and Josh, with a similarly fashioned storyline of coming from humble beginnings as a somewhat tame but quirky character, but inevitably finding himself down a continuous downward spiral that would ultimately earn him the status as an online lolcow in a similar vein. The story of Turan William Salas, or better known online as either Spidey Turan or Turan Spidey, could be said to be one that starts out as tame as one could possibly imagine. In fact, looking at his early activities on the internet, it can be quite hard to believe that he would inevitably evolve into the character that he has become today. With that said, Spidey Turan began his journey on the internet around mid-2021 or so. During this time, he was working a job as a sheep shearer at a shearing shed in his hometown of Perth, Western Australia. He would begin by uploading videos onto his YouTube channel, Aussie Sheep Shearing Vlogs, around this time, which, as you may be already able to guess, predominantly featured content of him vlogging his everyday life working as a sheep shearer. These online activities will remain pretty consistent during these months, with Spidey creating simple day-in-the-life vlogs and for the most part keeping a low profile online. However, it wasn't until late 2021 that Spidey would begin to upload TikToks under the username Shearing Shed Vlogs, where he would begin uploading videos of him doing street interviews in the streets of Perth. It was only shortly after creating this page that his content would truly begin to take off, with one street interview video going viral and accumulating nearly 45,000 likes to date. From here on out and going into 2022, Spidey's videos began to take somewhat of a shift away from his original street interview niche of choice, as he began to go back to making videos showcasing his day-to-day life as a sheep shearer. These videos were for the most part quite tame, despite Spidey's otherwise quirky nature beginning to unearth itself in his videos around this time. These videos proved to perform quite well, with Spidey having a video uploaded on March 22nd of this year breaking 1 million total views.
I'll put my cock in your eye.
So far, Spidey was building up a reputation of being the sheep shearer guy from TikTok, with a few interesting quirks and character traits that kept people coming back. It's definitely safe to say that unlike either Daniel Larson or Joshua Block, that Spidey's beginnings were for the most part observably less turbulent, at least as seen online up to this point in time. However, this steady streak would all come to an end at the beginning of August of 2022. It was around this time that Spidey announced to his TikTok fans that he was quitting his job at the shearing shed and had plans to fly to Turkey to join the Turkish military. You see, one key detail of this story specifically is that Spidey is half Turkish, and with this is also a Turkish citizen. Given that military service is mandatory in Turkey, Spidey announced that he was going to Turkey in order to complete his compulsory military service, and with this decided to make his way to Turkey to do just this. Once arriving in Turkey, Spidey had to perform a medical examination in order to join the Turkish military. However, one key detail about Spidey is that he has both autism and ADHD, and with this, it was because of Spidey's autism specifically that he was deemed not fit for the army, and was therefore exempt from military service. With Spidey's plans of joining the Turkish military out the window, he found himself aimlessly stranded in Turkey without any direction or purpose. However, with his sheep shearing job, he managed to save up a decent savings bubble, and with his subsequent abundance of free time, decided to use this as an opportunity to travel the world. So, after staying in Turkey for about a month, Spidey decided to book a one-way ticket to the UK due to him growing bored of Turkey, beginning what would be a long and amusing expedition around the world documented for the world to see. This trip to the UK would mark the beginning of Spidey's journey around the world, in which he would subsequently livestream and vlog for the world to see. During these trips, Spidey would for the most part wander the streets of wherever he found himself and livestream his day-to-day activities. From here on out, he would live off of his pre-existing savings bubble as well as donations and additional earnings from his live videos, as well as some money from his family. Given that Spidey finds himself on something of a tight budget and has to keep expenses minimal, for many of these trips, Spidey would often sleep on the streets and wander alone throughout the night, which has inevitably found himself in some interesting situations, as we will soon discuss. On the topic of expenses and budgeting, one very crucial detail to the Spidey Turan story has to do with his struggles with drug addiction. It's been said online that Spidey has struggled with both drug addiction and homelessness well before his TikTok days, with some sources even stating that he has struggled with these issues since he was 15 years old, with him getting kicked out of his house at this time due to his drug habits. However, if there's one thing that his live streaming and online activities has exposed the world to, it's his rampant drug abuse issues. More specifically, Spidey has found himself severely addicted to both ketamine and nitrous oxide, which is a recurring theme within the Spidey Turan lore that is of critical importance to note. On the same note, Spidey also made somewhat of a name for himself based off of the many videos he's made while using ketamine, more specifically his many snot-blowing videos which have garnered lots of attention online due to shock value alone.
I'm a savage.
As a matter of fact, this is exactly how I came to discover Spidey myself. Regardless, as expected as well, this drug abuse also shows itself frequently in his live streams, in which he can often be seen abusing said substances live. For example, Spidey's made many live streams that have gone on for hours and hours at a time of him sucking nitrous oxide out of a balloon, and quite literally not much else. Or using ketamine, depending. As well, this drug abuse has also found himself being kicked out of Airbnbs on a few occasions. As well, one key instance of many within the Spidey Turan story involves another instance when, while on a livestream on one of his many trips to the UK, Spidey ended up getting himself so high that a viewer on his ongoing livestream had to call an ambulance for him. However, ultimately, once these people arrived, he was told to turn off his livestream and he was tended to adequately, and he ultimately ended up being just fine. Spidey has also had many close calls in regards to almost overdosing, with this instance being one of the most predominant ones that comes to mind. Of course, there are many, many other drug-related instances amongst his lore. However, going over everything in detail would likely find us here all day. Maybe those will owe themselves separate videos, but we'll see about that. Beyond this too, many of his live streams have seen him abuse said substances in public, such as for example when he was sucking nitrous out of a balloon in the middle of a London cafe while on live. In this live, he was also causing a scene due to his Bluetooth speaker that was reading out TTS requests from his viewers, in which caused for an interesting altercation in which ultimately resulted in Spidey getting kicked out of the said cafe. On the same note also, this Bluetooth speaker and TTS reader is another important bit to note within the Spidey Turan lore. You see, this speaker, as you may already expect, makes Spidey stick out like a sore thumb in public, especially when traveling within the busy streets of major cities. This, paired with the oftentimes malicious intentions of people on the internet, is most certainly not a good pairing, as we could probably already imagine. For example, on one of his later trips to Turkey in 2023, a viewer decided to donate and play a terrorist chant while Spidey was roaming down a busy street. As a result of this chant blaring, and probably due to bad luck on Spidey's end, there is a group of Turkish police on that same street who confronted Spidey on this matter. Ultimately, the stream ended directly after this confrontation, with Spidey apologizing profusely in relation to this matter. This is a common theme within the Spidey Turan lore, as you may expect, and similar situations always seem to reoccur, almost always ending with Spidey getting flustered over the given TTS messages and then apologizing profusely as a result. In relation to his drug habits, however, it's important to note that Spidey has tried on multiple occasions to get himself sober, and in fact his intentions to do so are reoccurring within his story. However, almost always do these efforts seem to fail, and he always seems to relapse. With Spidey, it seems that every time he intends to better his life in some way, shape, or form, it doesn't seem to last long until he finds himself back to where he originally started. Though I suppose that we got sidetracked quite a bit from our original storyline with those bits of information, though they are of crucial importance to keep in mind from here on out. With all that being said, after touring around the UK and finding himself once again bored and aimless, Spidey decided to take a trip to the US nearing the latter part of 2022. His trip would begin with him staying briefly in South Dakota for some reason, and would later find Spidey making his way to both Los Angeles and later New York. These trips would follow a similar premise to his last trips, revolving around him both live streaming and vlogging his excursions wandering around wherever he found himself, oftentimes late at night and with no place to stay. Of course, this paired with his literal aimless wandering around sketchy parts of wherever he was staying, often high on either nitrous or ketamine, has made for some interesting encounters, let's just say.
Hi?
Are you from around here?
What are you talking to me for?
You have any money?
You trying to start something bad?
This was especially the case during Spidey's journey to LA, where he found himself in many sketchy situations that followed a similar premise to the ones highlighted above. For example, during this LA trip while riding a transit bus during the late hours of the night, Spidey would get robbed for all of his possessions by a random homeless man. Spidey decided to record this altercation while panicking and screaming for the man to, quote, give him his phone back and that he was, quote, autistic and from Australia.
I'm fine! I'm from Australia! I won't have a way to get back home! I've got autism! I've got autism! I've got autism! Can you please give me my phone? I've got autism!
This video, as well as many others from his LA trip, would garner even more attention for Spidey, with the latter video going viral and gaining over 829,000 likes in about 6 months or so. As well, another video of his would go viral on this trip, in which he explains how to stay safe while wandering the sketchy parts of LA, which, as you may expect, involves getting on a similar level of crazy to those around you, as we'll see.
This is how I stay safe at night.
Hey, where you from?
Hey!
Hey, where you from?
Hey!
Hey, where you from?
What are you talking to me for?
Where you from, man?
Hey!
Hey, come back.
And then you gotta hit them with a grunt. Well, you're trying to start something, bar. And then you gotta run. Also, you can also hit them with the mace as well. You gotta keep grunting because it shows that you're a beast.
It could be said that around this time, Spidey's status as an internet lolcow was beginning to truly take shape, building himself a reputation as being a drug-addicted travel vlogger who found himself entangled into many interesting situations, mostly due to his lifestyle as both an IRL live streamer and as someone who would often wander into sketchy situations due to being effectively homeless. Of course, such a concoction of events mixed with his already eccentric personality and, I guess, drug addiction made Turan an enticing figure to many. And with the abundance of content that he produced, this only attracted even more attention for him. Of course, with this now, we can begin to see why Spidey is often directly associated with both Daniel Larson and World of T-Shirts, with all three characters living fairly similar lifestyles, being essentially eccentric homeless vloggers who find themselves entangled into many interesting situations in a typical lolcow fashion. With that being said, it was from here on out that Spidey would begin to travel around the world, seemingly completely at random. However, he seems to revisit both the UK and US relatively frequently in specific. As well, he's also traveled further around Europe and Asia, and as of more recently, he's found himself traveling to both Thailand and Japan, though these two trips we'll touch back on in just a short bit, as these trips found themselves to be quite eventful, let's just say. But going back to his LA trip, while in LA, as is expected with Spidey's pre-existing drug habits, he ended up having a severe relapse while on this trip there. With this, he decided to take a plane trip home back to Australia, this time visiting Melbourne. While here, he got himself into drama for filming in a brothel. He also took a brief detour to Broken Hill in New South Wales, where he found very brief employment working as a sheep shearer once again. However, it was said that once someone purchased Spidey a plane ticket to travel to New Zealand not even a week after starting this job, that he quit in order to go on this trip. As well, it's alleged that during his stay here that he also made money selling Ritalin to kids on the streets. With that out of the way, while Spidey was on this trip to New Zealand, he was hospitalized due to RSV in the lungs, likely as a direct result of his living conditions and finding himself often sleeping in cold, damp alleyways and dirty toilets. He was treated for this viral infection briefly in a Queenstown hospital, however ultimately found himself running away from the hospital shortly after, as he was unable to pay the hospital $200 for the care that he received. Ironically though, shortly after this incident, Spidey decided to flee to the UK and pull his usual shenanigans, as we will discuss. As is maybe expected because of this, Spidey is still wanted by the same Queenstown hospital due to this incident alone. With that said, this brings us to about late spring of 2023 or so. Spidey found himself going back to Perth for a brief period of time, presumably to lay low after having yet another severe relapse while on this aforementioned trip to the UK. Once home with his family, it did not last long until more drama decided to come up within his life. You see, with Spidey frequently live streaming while at home and with his Bluetooth speaker playing his live streams TTS loudly as usual, this was something that his family did not take too well to. Eventually, this led to both Spidey and his family getting into a massive fight, which ultimately resulted in Spidey getting kicked out of the house and after less than a week, found himself fleeing right back to the UK, where it was back to business as usual for Spidey. Though maybe we're getting more sidetracked by Spidey's infinite plethora of side stories than is necessary for a quick introductory overview of his history. So from this point onward, Spidey found himself traveling the world sporadically as usual, frequenting his usual occasions and a few new ones, such as both Thailand and Japan as mentioned above. It was around this time also, so this would be around summer 2023, that Spidey went back to Turkey once again, and the previously mentioned terrorist chant TTS incident occurred. As I just mentioned, around this time Spidey spent a decent amount of time traveling around Asia as well, namely around both Thailand and Japan. Now it's important to note around here that Spidey is such a sporadic traveler that it would seem almost counterproductive to keep track of each and every single trip that he's been on. However, for the sake of convenience and to not overwhelm you with too many details at once, we'll just focus on the more important trips that are relevant to the main Spidey Turan story. With that said, while on his more recent trip to Japan, Spidey found himself involved in his first true mainstream controversy that captured the attention of people even outside of the general Spidey Turan bubble. While vlogging himself riding a train in Japan, Spidey decided to walk into and investigate a female-only section of the passenger train that he was riding on. This caused a lot of backlash within the community, with many people saying that Spidey was being culturally insensitive with this move. According to Spidey himself, he claimed that he was only investigating to see if there are any males causing issues within the given section of the train. However, as we can already tell, this was not the wisest move on Spidey's part. Ultimately, after many on the platform made videos responding to this incident and reposting the clip bashing Spidey himself, Spidey ultimately decided to make an apology regarding the incident, so I guess that's cool. At this current point in time, Spidey finds himself traveling back and forth from various locations, primarily from locations in Asia, so namely Japan, as well as taking separate detours back to Australia. Now, as far as a basic explainer video goes, I believe that this should be a good place to end things. Like with many lolcows, Spidey's story is one that is incredibly hectic, so much so that his whole story is next to impossible to keep track of. However, given the complexity of his story, I really hope that I did at least a decent job at trying to summarize his history and online doings to at least a somewhat adequate standard, given how complex of a character he is, of course. On the same note, it's important to note that Spidey is a character with an infinite amount of side stories, so much so that if I were to tell them all, this would likely be a multi-hour long video, or at the very least require me to make multiple part series regarding the matter, which I might actually do. From evading fares while traveling by sitting in bathroom stalls in order to travel for free on trains, to picking up his own waste with his hands, to going on dates with OnlyFans girls, if there's one thing that's for certain, it's that Spidey's lore goes much, much deeper than you may initially expect. In fact, even scripting this video has made me learn so much about his story, and to say the least, its complexity, like with most lolcows, is absolutely overwhelming. So with that being said, with this video covering the very basics of this character, if a multi-part series is something that you guys would be interested in, then please let me know. With that all being said, if you've made it this far, then I'd like to thank you for the view, and of course, stay tuned for more lolcow and Spidey Turan content to come. Cheers.